we're going to get started. Can I get a thumbs up that you hear me and see the presentation okay? All right, awesome. We are still, shocker, solving quadratic equations, all right? This is going to be the last way that I show you how to solve a quadratic equation. We saw how to solve a quadratic equation by factoring. We saw how to solve a quadratic equation by using square roots. Unfortunately, though, not all quadratic equations can be factored. They don't all have these beautiful whole number factors. Not all quadratic equations can be used or can be solved using square roots, because if it has an x term in it, I won't be able to unsquare it, and then I can't solve that quadratic using square roots. So the quadratic formula is the one way you can solve a quadratic equation every time. It will solve any kind of quadratic equation out there. So a lot of students, they'll learn the quadratic formula and then they'll be like, oh, I'm never factoring or using square roots again because this will work every time. And you're right, this will work every time. It's just sometimes factoring in square roots might have been a quicker way of getting to the answer, but this will work every single time. All right, I just want you guys to remember a few things. When you solve a degree 2 quadratic equation for x, you should get 2 answers. And those 2 answers are going to be the x-intercepts of its graph. That's what we're solving for. We're trying to figure out where did these parabolas cross over the x-axis. Well, guys, a couple things can happen. When you solve a quadratic equation and you get 2 different answers for x, like negative 2.5 and 4, then you know it's a parabola that could look something like this, where it crosses the x-axis at 2 completely different x values. But then, sometimes when you solve a quadratic equation, you end up solving and you get the exact same answer twice. You get like x equals 2 and x equals 2 as your answer. So yeah, you did get 2 answers, but it only looks like 1 because it's the same answer twice. Well, that happens when you had some of those parabolas whose vertex was directly on the x-axis. When the vertex is directly on the x-axis, then that's going to be when you get that same answer twice, because it only looks like it touches the x-axis 1 time. But then, guys, there's a third scenario. We have seen parabolas that do this, where the vertex is completely above the x-axis, and then the parabola ends up opening up. So it never crosses over the x-axis. So what kind of answers do you get when you solve a quadratic equation that doesn't cross the x-axis, right? Well, guys, this will happen when you solve for x and get this, you're going to get an imaginary number as your answer. You're not going to get a real x value. So in the next section, we're going to learn about imaginary numbers, these answers that you get to quadratics who don't have any x-intercepts, who don't cross over the x-axis. I don't want to get too into that yet, but just know that that's coming. The next kind of answer you'll get to a quadratic isn't real. It's an imaginary number. It's crazy, all right? All right, but we're going to focus on these 2. We're going to focus on when you get 2 different x values and when you get the same x value twice. How do we solve for those x values, those x-intercepts? All right, guys, your homework tonight is on Delta Math. So I'm just going to pull problems right off of Delta Math so you can see what your homework's going to look like and then how you type your answers in. All right? But before we do that, let me give you the quadratic formula. All right, so if you take any degree 2 quadratic equation, set it equal to 0, there is a formula that will solve this equation for x. It is called the quadratic formula. It only solves quadratics, okay? Degree 2s. It says that if you were to solve this equation for x, x would end up equaling, ready? Here we go. I don't know if you guys remember it. The opposite of b plus or minus the square root, they've already got the plus or minus of that square root built into the formula, of b squared minus 4 times a times c. All of that is underneath the square root. And then all of this, the entire right side of the equal sign, gets divided by 2 times a. That's the quadratic formula. I know you've done it in Algebra 1, and maybe you even used it a little bit in geometry. Can I get a thumbs up if you guys remember that, if you know you've seen that before? Yes? Okay, here we go. So guys, it's kind of like, well, yeah, I understand it's a formula, right? And formulas, you just plug numbers in for the variables. Well, who the hell are a, b, and c? Guys, remember, a is always going to be the number in front of the x squared term. B is always going to be the number in front of the just x. and C is always going to be that number by itself at the end of the expression, okay? All right, so here we go. So I've given you a list of steps as to how to use the quadratic formula. I'm just going to use these steps to solve the first problem. But if you ever have to look back, I've listed the steps for you. All right, let's do it. Let me get a problem. Hold on. Hold on, I'm just trying to pick specific problems, guys. Just give me a second. I'm on Delta Math. I'm just trying to get a problem that I want. Oh, I gotta do something. Hold on. Okay, so your homework's gonna look like this. They're gonna ask you to solve the equation for all, guys, see how it says real solutions? It's telling you to find the real number answers. We're only finding real number answers, but I'm telling you, in the future, the very near future, we're actually gonna start getting imaginary answers to these problems, all right? But not yet. All right, we have to solve this quadratic. So let me write it down, and then we'll solve it and come back. 2w squared minus 9w plus 3 equals negative 4w. Okay? So I left all the examples blank because I'm just going to grab them from Delta Math, so I apologize, all right? But here we go. So if we want to solve this equation, they're using w instead of x. If we want to solve this equation for w using the quadratic formula, the first thing you got to do, guys, is you got to get everything on one side set equal to 0. So you can identify who your A, your B, and your C are. So let's get everything on one side set equal to 0. So let's add the 4w over. And you end up with 2w squared minus 5w, right now we'll have negative 5w, plus 3 equals 0. Okay, so guys, when you were solving a quadratic equation by factoring, we always got everything on one side set equal to 0. When you solve something using the quadratic formula, you always get everything on one side set equal to 0. It was only using square roots where we moved everything away from what's being squared. Square roots is the only one where we didn't make sure everything was set equal to 0. Okay, so guys, let's get A, B, and C. If I have to plug certain numbers into this formula, let's get them. So A is going to be 2, the number in front of the square term. B is going to be negative 5, the number in front of the just w, which is your just x, if you will. And then your C is going to be 3, the number at the end. And now all you have to do, one at a time, is plug 2, negative 5, and 3 in for their corresponding variables in the quadratic formula. All right, so w, it's just going to be w because we have w. W is going to equal, the formula says first I need the opposite of b. Well, guys, we said b is negative 5, so the opposite of that is positive 5. So I need positive 5 plus or minus the square root of, now I got to take b and square it. So guys, take b, which is negative 5, and square the whole thing. Please write that in parentheses. You better write everything just the way I write it, because then your calculator is going to do everything for us, and nobody's going to get it wrong. All right, then we have to subtract 4. So subtract 4. Then we have to times it with a, which is 2. So times it with 2. And then we have to times it with c, which is 3. And then it's all divided by, now this is a mistake some students make. For some reason, some students think it's just the square root that's being divided by 2a, but guys, it's not. Everything, the entire right side of the equal sign is being divided by 2 times a, which is 2 times a is 2. All right, give me a thumbs up if you were okay plugging it in. Everybody all right? All right, that should be the easy part, just putting the a's, b's, and c's in their spot. Guys, the hardest part is every year I have students, this b squared minus 4ac part, some students can never get that to become the right number. So just use your calculator and type it in the exact way I wrote it. So I want you guys to do this. because the rest of the problem is just us cleaning all this up. So we're going to take 5. We're going to add or subtract it with the square root of. So guys, don't type the square root yet. Just type all of this into your calculator, not under a square root, and hit enter. And let your calculator calculate that b squared minus 4ac part. Don't put it under a square root yet, because we're going to put it under the square root here. So I'm just going to type in parenthesis, -5, parenthesis squared, subtract 4, parenthesis 2, parenthesis 3, parenthesis. I'm just typing this into my calculator the exact way I wrote it, hit enter. Everybody should have gotten a positive 1. B squared minus 4ac is a positive 1 here. So now we have the square root of 1, because that's what that became, and it's all going to get divided by 2 times 2 is 4. Okay? All right, so guys, now go back to that square root. Who's the square root of 1? That's a square root that we can get rid of. I know who the square root of 1 is. So this is going to become 5 plus or minus. Who's the square root of 1? Who do you have to square to get 1? 1. So the square root of 1 is 1, and then you're dividing that by 4. So because I was able to get rid of that square root, guys, I can keep going. I can figure out what 2 answers I'm about to get. One answer is going to come from when I take 5 and add 1 with it, and then divide it by 4. My second answer is going to come from when I take 5 and subtract 1 and then divide by 4. We're going to split up that plus or minus sign to create 2 different answers. All right, so let's do this one. 5 plus 1 is 6 divided by 4. What does 6 over 4 reduce to? That's 3 halves, 1.5. So when W equals 3 halves or 1.5, that's one of my answers. And then when I come over here, 5 minus 1 is 4. Divide that by 4. Who's 4 divided by 4? 1. So my 2 different answers to this degree 2 quadratic equation are when x are 1 and when x is 1.5. So guys, that means that if you were to graph this parabola, he would cross the x-axis when x is 1, and he would also cross when x is 1.5. So he's a real skinny parabola, all right? And we know he would open up because the a was positive, and he'd be looking something like that. But that's what you have found. You just found his x-intercepts, okay? When x is 1 and when x is 3 halves. All right, now let me show you how you're going to type that into Delta Math. All right, so guys, on Delta Math, I know my writing's in the way, but there's the problem. Here's your answer box. You are going to write it as 2 separate answers, so you technically need 2 answer boxes. So my first answer, it doesn't matter the order, I'll just say was 1. If you type 1 into the answer box like I have, you can either come over here and hit the plus sign, and that'll create a second answer box for your second answer, or the minute you hit a comma, like you were going to list the answers, if I hit a comma, it automatically creates that second answer box. And then I just want to put 3 divided by 2, 3/2. I hope you guys can see that. 3/2, you hit enter or submit, and it says 1 and 3 halves. Are those your answers? Yes, they are, and you'll get your green check. All right? So can I get a thumbs up that we're okay with that? Everybody good? All right, let me show you another scenario. Let me get another problem. Hold on. Give me a second. I'm just trying to grab. Oh, here it is. This is good. All right, now we're going to solve this one. All right, so if we solve this quadratic equation using the quadratic formula, first, you want everything on one side set equal to 0 so you can identify A, B, and C. Luckily, that's already done for us. So in this problem, A is going to be 25, B is going to be negative 20, and C is going to be positive 4. Everybody okay? Oh no. Guys, can you hear me? Am I going in and out? The meat's going crazy right now. Am I okay? Oh no. Can anybody unmute and tell me whether I'm okay or not? Oh, okay. I'm okay. You guys, your cameras are going crazy. They're flashing on and off. But as long as I'm okay, I'm going to keep going. But if I start to go crazy, can someone try to let me know? Okay. All right, here we go. All right. So now we know A, B, and C. Let's plug them into the formula. So technically, we're solving this for V instead of X. So V will equal the opposite of B is the opposite of negative 20, so just 20, plus or minus the square root of B squared, right? So negative 20 squared, but we're going to write it like this so that our calculator squares the 20 and the negative sign. Then we have to subtract 4. Then we have to times it with 25. And then we have to times it with positive 4. And then all of that, the whole right side of the equal sign, is going to be divided by 2 times A, which is 2 times 25. Okay, so again, most of the work is underneath this square root, getting that number to become a number. So we're going to say V equals 20 plus or minus the square root of. Guys, who is that number? So type it into your calculator exactly the way I wrote it. Do not put it under a square root though. So parenthesis, negative 20 squared, subtract 4, parenthesis 25, parenthesis 4, hit enter. And guys, you should have gotten the number 0. This should have become the number 0. So you're actually taking the square root of 0 and then dividing all of that by 2 times 25, which is 50. Okay? All right, let's go back. Let's go back to that square root. Can I take the square root of 0? What could I square to get 0? 0. The square root of 0 is 0. So that's good. So that's going to become 20 plus or minus 0, all divided by 50. So guys, we can keep going. We're going to split this into 2 different problems. One problem is going to be when I take 20 and add it with 0 and divide by 50. And then my second problem will be when I take 20 and minus 0 and divide it by 50. Okay, I hope I'm still with you guys. A lot of your cameras are going in and out, so I hope everybody's okay. So guys, over here, if I take 20 and add it with 0, I get 20. I divide it with 50. My zeros cancel. I'm left with 2 divided by 5, which doesn't reduce. So that's 2/5, which is about 0.4. So there's one answer to my degree 2 quadratic equation. But then guys, come down here. When you take 20 and you minus 0, you're also going to get 20 divided by 50, right? Because whether you add or subtract 0, it's going to keep the top number the same. So then I'm going to cancel my zeros. 2 divided by 5 is 2/5, which doesn't reduce. So I get the same answer a second time. So here's a problem where you get the same answer twice. So it looks like you only got one answer, but you are getting the same answer twice. But you only have to list it as one answer. Guys, that means that his parabola, 2/5 is what, 0.4? So it's right there. His x-intercept is his vertex. And since the number in front of the square term was positive, it's opening up. So it just means his parabola is one of those parabolas that only crossed the x-axis one time at its vertex, or touched the x-axis, I should say. All right, so let's type our answer in to Delta Math. It's just 2/5. Where's my Delta Math here? All right, so guys, we're going to put 2/5, and I don't need a second answer. So just 2/5, and I'll submit my answer. Yes, and you get your green check, okay? So is everybody all right with that? Everybody's good? Oh, your cameras are back. Okay. So guys, you're going to get the same answer twice whenever you get 0 underneath that square root. It's just going to create the same answer twice. All right, let's do one more, and then we're going to have to stop there. All right, let me find a problem that I want. All right, let's solve this one. All right, we're going to solve this one. All right, if I want to solve this quadratic equation for n using the quadratic formula, I got to get everything on one side set equal to 0 so I can figure out who my a, b, and c are. So minus 5 to the other side. And I'm going to get 4n squared minus 15n plus 10 equals 0. Now, guys, if this had a GCF, you would be allowed to divide that GCF out and create smaller numbers for A, B, and C, but you don't have to. So not a lot of students remember to do that. All right, let's do this. All right, so A in this problem is 4. B is negative 15, and C is 10. Let's plug them into the quadratic formula and start solving. So in this case, n, because they're using an n, will equal the opposite of b is going to be the opposite of negative 15, which is just 15. And guys, sometimes this will be a positive number, so you'll end up plugging in a negative. It's just they don't have a lot of examples, but this could definitely still be a negative number if it was positive here. All right, so this is going to be 15 plus or minus the square root of b squared is going to be negative 15 squared. Subtract 4 times a, which is 4, times c, which is 10. And then all of that, the entire right side, is going to be divided by 2 times a, which is 4. Okay? Again, I can only see a few of your cameras. I hope you're okay. I hope I'm all right. All right, we're going to concentrate on this b squared minus 4ac. What number do I get underneath this square root? So type this into your calculator, but don't take the square root of it. Don't put the square root. This is going to become 15 plus or minus the square root of what number? All right, so no square root yet, just parenthesis negative 15 squared, subtract 4, parenthesis 4, parenthesis 10, hit enter, and you should get a positive 65. And then all of that is going to get divided by 2 times 4, which is 8. All right, now guys, look at this. Go to that square root, right, because that's where all the work is. Can I take the square root of 65 and get a whole number? No. So that means I'm never going to be able to get rid of this square root completely. So I'm probably never going to be allowed to add the top together. All right, but ask yourself, can you simplify the square root of 65? Do any perfect squares divide evenly into 65? 4, 9, 16, 25, 36, 49, 64, 81. No. So that means that's already a simplified square root. So that means I don't have to do anything with it, because if I take the square root, it's going to be a really ugly decimal, and I don't want an ugly decimal. So guys, I'm never going to be allowed to add or subtract them together, so then I can't actually get a physical answer. This is as far as you have to go. This is the answer as far as we can take it. One answer will be when I take 15 and add the square root of 65 and divide all of that by 8. And guys, if you do it, it's just a really ugly decimal. Yeah, I'll do it real quick. 15 plus the square root of 65, enter, divided by 8. It's about 2.88782219, blah, blah, blah. It's like 2.9-ish. It's just an ugly decimal. All right, and then the second answer will come when you take 15 and subtract the square root of 65 and divide it by 8. But because I can't get rid of that square root and I can't simplify it, and none of these numbers can actually be reduced, you're done. So I would just advise leaving your answer like this, as the two answers in one. Type that into Delta Math. All right, and again, that's just a really ugly decimal too. All right, let me type it in so you guys can see what I want you to do. All right, so guys, I don't want anybody getting this wrong on their homework. Keep an eye on this answer box as I'm typing. If I want to type this in, I'm afraid you guys are going to get the fraction part wrong. You want to make sure all of this is divided by 8. So what I do is I go to my answer box and I do 15, I hit forward slash, and I put my 8. I create my fraction right away. And then I up arrow back to the top to put the rest of my numerator. So then I use the up arrow, and then I go over and then plus or minus the square root of 65. Otherwise, if you don't do that, if you just do 15 plus or minus the square root of 65, get right arrow out of that square root. If you put the division bar now, it only puts the radical, the square root, over the 8. And you don't want that. That's wrong. It all has to be divided by 8. So again, I just make my fraction, 15 forward slash 8, and then I up arrow and I right arrow, and now I just continue writing. Plus or minus the square root, 65, right arrow out of that square root, and now I hit submit, and I get my green check. Do you guys see what I'm talking about? Is how you type that answer. You can be tricky, okay? So just be careful.